The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
All right, well, thanks for coming out tonight, everybody. We have a very interesting talk for you. We have Kris here, a master gardener, and she's going to tell you all about the gardens and the flora around Queesit House. Take it away, Kris.
Thank you. And it's important for me to use the microphone so that he can report. Okay. And is it a face on or a global? Face on. Okay. You didn't know that I used to work on plays every winter with the Winton Club, so I know a lot about microphones and stuff like that. Anyway, thank you so much for coming tonight, because this is a labor of love. It is really something that, you know, the more that you start working with this area, the more in love with it you become. And I've had so much help with what I'll be telling you tonight from the wonderful resources that we have around Easton. So please, if you definitely know I make an error, I've been trying to funnel in so much information in the last 2 years, I occasionally may slip. So go ahead, feel free. So who am I? The first thing that Dana said, I should tell you who I am. And I said, oh, I don't know about that, Dana. So here it is. Hi, come on in. My first job was as a sales girl in the Turkish shop and in the Paris Pavilion at the New York World's Fair. And my Turkish boss spoke 6 languages, but English wasn't one of them. So I very quickly had to learn French and how to get by, and he had no patience whatsoever. He was this very fiery person, so it made you learn fast, and that was the first job. So, but I also got to know international people, you know, compared to the very family-oriented and kind of private, uninteresting life I had been living. This was exciting. And it did open up, as you'll see. It's just been a roller coaster of fabulous things to do and many opportunities that I've been able to follow. So the next thing when I started going to college, I was a community survey interviewer, and I actually interviewed some famous people I learned later, but this was for during a lot of the racism problems, to find out what people really felt about politics and so on. So there I am, this young, innocent person, and I got people to talk to me because I looked like such a goofball. Nobody was worried about what they said with me. So that was a fun thing. That was just a summer job. Then I did drop out of college. You know, I just didn't know where I was going or what I was doing, and I became self-supporting from that time on. And I got a job in a microscope lab, and I learned fantastic bacteriology. Then later on, when I did start back to college, I met my future husband, and he went to Woods Hole every summer, and I was a lab technician in Woods Hole with some of the greatest scientists in the world. I then went on to a master's. Meanwhile, mind you, I was a French and Russian major. So learning all of this science and everything, I realized I am a scientist. You know, I'm so curious about everything, and you'll see that when we get into this garden, about how my science just keeps popping up and say, what if, or why? But then I went on, I finally went for a doctorate, and at that point we had moved to Canada. I became an assistant professor at Mount Holyoke. I was a director for vaccines at Dartmouth and Hanover, and I was telling Miles at that point we were the beta testers for the Macintosh. So I learned all about computers at Dartmouth. It was wonderful. Then, unfortunately, my doctoral studies had led to a vaccine discovery, and I ended up at a relatively young age. It was like my lab coat got caught in the machine, and I, had to do this vaccine development. Then continued at Dartmouth Med School doing some very interesting endocrinology research. After that, moved down here to Cambridge, became a review board editor for the Health Effects Institute. So that was a government job. And this was seeing the effects of air pollution on various people. And as a review board member, I had to make sure that they had been doing their studies correctly, that they reported them accurately. And so for a lot of my life, I ended up being an editor for science in various ways. But then we needed money, and I became lab director on a blood substitute project. That was 2 years. Left for ethical reasons. Then I became an independent editor and publisher, and at that point we were in Winchester. At the same time, very often these jobs overlapped. I became a professor in AIDS. I became a biotech GMP trainer, that's good manufacturing practice. These were people on unemployment who wanted to get jobs in the biotech industry. And we took them and in a year gave them chemistry, English, computers, everything that they would need, and made them just the best people out there. We had all of the biotech companies were falling over themselves trying to hire these people. And I have to say that as far as education goes, I think that was one of the most critical points in my life that I learned. The superintendent of schools, Ron Fitzgerald, believed in the 7 levels of learning, that you might learn auditory, or you might learn by reading it, by seeing it, by actually doing it, by all of these different types of ways of teaching and learning. And he told us that the student doesn't fail, you do. And therefore you had to learn how, hi, hello. So it turned my life upside down, because I had always found it very easy to get good grades and so on. And frankly, the industry was made for people like me. That it turns out everybody's got these abilities and everybody is smart in their own way, and learning how to reach and get through and explain it the right way became a very important part of my life. And I think it helped my editing a whole lot, that sometimes people would just, they'd garble and they'd use these huge words and everything. And you wanted to say, well, what do you mean? I want to use an example that when I taught how DNA synthesis and protein production happens, what we did was we got everybody up in 2 rows, and everybody wore a little sign of what kind of a chemical part they were. And then we did a minuet so that they had to, reach the right person to hand on their information and so on. They were laughing their heads off, but did they get it? They really did. And they learned it beautifully. So I think that part of my life was one of the most important things, that those great grades you have in school isn't necessarily a sign that later on you're going to do well, that later on you're going to be happy with what you're doing, and so on. That it really does come from inside, and that you may have a different way of learning from other people. Anyway, let's go. I worked for New England Journal of Medicine, John Wiley. I was a senior paralegal. I became a patent agent. And best job of all, intellectual property searcher. I had to look for prior art for patents to make sure that most of the time I worked for Boston Scientific for 14 years, so that when they went and applied for a patent, they knew they were going to get it because nobody else had done that before. And I would teach them the right language to use so that their examiner would enjoy it. Yeah, that was so much fun. It was like surfing the internet every day, just looking for stuff. Really fun. As life went on, I became a certified yoga teacher. I did independent patent agent work to help inventors figure out whether or not they really wanted to go down the route of getting a patent and how to license it. And finally, I did get certified as a master gardener. And worked with the Master Gardeners Association Sierra Club, and AMC is the Appalachian Mountain Club. I would say one of the happiest, most fun parts of my life in the last decade was doing trail work. I've done that in Costa Rica and the Virgin Islands, Maine, northern Maine. Oh my goodness, if you have not seen the stars in northern Maine, go do it. But what's really fun is, I wouldn't say I'm results oriented because I want to achieve and have people admire me. It's because I feel like if I'm wasting my time, I just don't feel good. So being able to do trail work in all of these exotic places has been such a fun way to give back and help the environment. So I do want to tell you that later on you're going to see that I'm the person who had those elm trees taken down, that I am a tree hugger. I really do love nature. And that's been the biggest part of my life. Anyway, go away. So, Master Gardeners Association. Why would one become a master gardener? Well, we do, finally, okay. Becoming master gardener means you first have to go through their training program, and it's a little easier these days. A few years back when I did it, it was twice the coursework than they're doing now. And it's a matter of taking courses in just about everything that you can imagine, which is the geology, the soil types, the chemistry of different things, how plants grow, how you can tell that they're diseased, the different types of diseases and so on. Everything that you can think of, we try and get a smattering of that. But you do keep on growing. And as you become more involved with a garden, as I am with the Quessett garden, you start to become more expert in some of the very specialized things that you need to do. Now, the mission of Massachusetts Master Gardeners, most Master Gardener associations started as part of the extension program for state colleges. And that is the way Massachusetts started. But I think it was in 1986 they decided they weren't going to do it anymore. Well, the master gardeners who were certified were not pleased about this. We were very happy with having an organization. So essentially they went private. It is a nonprofit organization, but it's its own organization and no longer run by UMass. But many of the UMass professors do teach us. We have very close relationships with them. We have about 52 different project gardens, and what these are is they run the gamut from, you can see that there's, let's see, the Heritage Museum is one of the sites. Ours is now one of the sites. And this only goes on as long as there's a program manager because somebody's got to take responsibility for running it. But that's where it comes from. So how did I end up here at Quessett was that Bill Ames has a very close significant other, Kathy Stone, who is a master gardener, but she is the program manager for the Haskell Gardens. And so she's already got her hands full. So she decided Paula Peterson was going through the Master Gardeners program, that maybe Paula would like to do it. Well, Paula was still an intern at the time, and Paula is now our vice president. You know Paula, heck, she's going to be president next year. At any rate, Paula didn't, but I was working with her at the time on outreach, and so Paula outreached to me, and there you go. So, and you know, you never say no to Bill Ames, so. That's how it all happened. But it essentially has to come from, I was the person who had to write up the proposal to the Master Gardeners in order to get them to approve that we could have a site there. It has to be where they believe that you'll be able to get enough volunteers to help you, that it's something that we can do. It's something that we want to do. In general, in the past, we always did horticulture. Nowadays, they have quite a few project gardens that are producing food for people, and many people are interested in doing that. That, to me, is kind of agriculture. But some of these very wonderful formal gardens that we have in the state, I have been able to volunteer at many of them. The Codman Estate, Longfellow House in Cambridge, the Olmsted Estate, Fairstead. These are all wonderful places where you learn so much. But I think the gem in the entire tiara has got to be that I was able to garden at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum and go into their courtyard there and, you know, clip all of the little babies' tears and everything. That was really something. They also had a good horticulturist, and that was my last question, who's the manager? Many of these gardens do have a full-time horticulturist. Sometimes they have a full gardening staff. And then the Master Gardener program manager just does what they ask us to do. In this case, we don't have a full-time gardener, so there's a lot more riding on getting it right and making sure. So I'm very often asking my buddies and everybody, is this the way that you would do it? Is this the right thing for us to do? Because if you have the gardener, they're the ones who their life is on the line if they really mess up. For me, I want to be sure that I've got a whole group of people that you can blame instead of just me. So this is, I'm going to show you a few pictures of our team. The lady on the left, Lori, is a lawyer, and she was an intern last fall. She's since been certified, and sitting on the wall there is Roxy Gray, who is one of my regulars. I could not live without Roxy. Here's Paula Peterson and in the center, and then that's Kathy Webster, who is the chair of our southeastern area for the Master Gardeners. She gets together quarterly group meetings for us. And then this person is Nancy Connolly. She is the inkberry diva. She is so good at getting those inkberries looking great and getting the porcelain berry, you know, this porcelain berry in between all of the inkberries and everything. But Nancy is very often there before I arrive in the morning. We have 2 mornings a month is our time, and getting a full cadre of people to be able to help is pretty hard. So I'm very thankful for both Roxy and Nancy. They're real regulars. Go. And this is Roxy and 2 others. Tracy Firth is now the secretary of the organization. You may have noticed we took out an entire row of overgrown boxwoods in front of that tiny pool there. We replaced them. We tried small azaleas instead, and they seem to be doing very well. So that was a lucky, good choice. But at the time, you'll be hearing me talk about boxwoods a lot. Boxwoods are my nightmare. Boxwoods make me lose sleep at night. Well, our garden. Where did it come from? And, it isn't just as simple as, well, Winthrop put it in 1911. There's a lot of water that went onto the bridge. So I wanted to talk about the ownership of the land and how that's changed over time, the historic development of how the garden came to be, and what I'm calling the Quessett Plaza. You think of Quessett House because it's still here, but you'll see some pictures of the other things that used to be around right here. And finally, and this is just something to keep thinking about, where did the dirt come from? Because when you build a house, I'm going to show you pictures. I actually have a lot of drawings, but I didn't include them, before Quessett House was built. And actually, there was a house here before Quessett House was built. Quessett House was built, then the Oaks Ames Hall, and then the library. But before that, there was a house right over here, the Lake House. So that's what I want you to be thinking about, is that each time you built one of these, they've got to build it on a flat, level plane. And mind you, this had been a hill. This was all a slope. So where did those levels come from? Where's the dirt from? Where we see holes out here, especially right next to the library lot, I know for sure that they took a lot of that dirt where the lake house had been and moved it uphill a bit. And I still have a question about what's now an official vernal pool, which is this pool up here with the Phragmites. That may have been emptied out in order to bring the dirt for all of these places. But let's look at the ownership of the properties. So this is modern. This is the actual Massachusetts, you can go onto their database and see absolutely who owns what and where the property lines are. So here we are. This pink is Main Street, and there's the Quessett Brook, and here's us, 51, we're right here right now. 45 is the Boyajian house that straddles the actual Quessett Brook. Here's the library and so on. The garden is here, and you notice 51, the library bought Quessett House. They bought 51, but they rented, with the 99-year lease, a lot of these properties on the outside. Now this is 5 Hobart Way, and here is that, you can actually see the pictures of the emergent wetland, they call it, at number 8. So we're really on quite number 8. The drainage ditch, a lot of people are calling it a stream, but I want everybody to start calling it a drainage ditch, because this is what's going to get the Conservation Commission on our side, we hope. Runs right along here, but it is on the Quessett property, most of it. A little corner of it goes up here. And Bill Ames just last week found that the culvert right here actually continues right up into the ruins. That they have been draining this area for a couple of centuries. So it's really kind of interesting. And also whether or not, as I said, whether this is a matter of they took out some of the soil to make a plateau here, a plateau here, plateau there, and a plateau where you can't see it yet. Hobart Ames, the brother of Winthrop, and one of the 2 sons, surviving sons of Oaks Ames, built a great big mansion over here, and that needed to be leveled off as well. So we've had a lot of property ins and outs going here, and let's look at a previous one. Here we go. This is about 1895, and how do I know that? Let's start with when Oliver moved here in 1806. He came in April, and by August he was buying some of the properties up. And one of the properties he bought, and I'm going like, no kidding, was a forge and a nail shop here near Pond Street. And I don't know who built them, but it says they were probably built about 1892. So before Oliver came, there was already something started here. But he loved the water. He was already a blacksmith in West Bridgewater. His father had been making tools, so he was already up and running, you know, man in his 20s to do all he could. So right away, he buys some of the property here, but then by about, I think, 1811, he started buying up other properties, including where the family home would be, and all of these properties along here. 1844 is when Oliver makes the corporation, so that you see it says Oliver Ames and Sons. So that's who's owning most of this stuff, is Oliver Ames and Sons is the corporation. But in 1847, they gave this plot right here to Jeremy Lake. Jeremy was actually an inventor. He was a smith. He had a forge and so on. And that was all happening right here. Now, Ed Hand told me what this little X is. Here's the library, and there is the lake house. Mrs. Lake, his second wife, lived there until 1900. So we know that the house was there until 1900. By 1911, we've got pictures. It seems to have been gone. So somebody's looking into whether or not that's actually the Freitas house on Center Street, because Jacobson told me that a house had been moved from this area. So don't really know where it went. Maybe I don't care either. But the fact that I think that Winthrop was, his father died in 1899. His mother died in 1903. Meanwhile, Winthrop is unhappily being in the publishing business, something he did not want to do. And I think once his mother died, then he was free, and he went off to Europe and so on. When he came back, that's when he started all of the theater work. So what happened in between 1903, when Mrs. Ames dies, and then 1911, when Jeremy actually builds the garden, which is going to be right here. So my suspicion is, okay, here's the actual picture. This is a little bit later. I think about 1915. How do you know? There's the garden. The garden is built. And there is that lake. But I'm thinking that the lake house has been removed here. We can't see it at all. Sometimes when you see very old pictures, and very often they're drawings of the library, you can kind of see the lake house behind it. But what Ed told me was that X was a barn or an outbuilding. And I think that is gone too. But let's look at the edges here. Ed calls this a stage, and I'm always calling it the pergola, because that's the official name in a Renaissance garden, is that, but you notice here, it doesn't go all the way down the way ours does. It really does look like a stage. So the other thing you see here is what Ed calls it a greenhouse. I have seen some drawings where it's called a conservatory. What that was for, I think, could have been, look at those fields up there. I think that the Ameses could have been raising vegetables and things for their people. It was a real company town, you know, so whatever, for those types of fields and everything, you would have to have storage houses, tools, and so on. But you can see that this looks so different from today. So there's Quested House. Here's where we are right now. And look at the size of Hobart's mansion. This wasn't something small. And what the Ameses are always doing, they put up a house on the company property usually, and then when somebody dies and nobody decides to live there anymore, they tear it down. And that's what happened with this one. Hobart became the president of the corporation, and later on he moved to Tennessee, and like many of them, didn't live here all the time. Quessett House was mostly like a summer place, and even later on you'll find that Winthrop was living in Santa Barbara for his summers and did a lot of stuff in Santa Barbara. So how much it was being used, I think the interesting thing about the garden, though, is if you look at the structure and the types of plants and everything, it's very much the way it is today. It didn't have the brick walks around the pool, but other than that, I would say that it definitely has those plateaus and everything. Where did that soil come from? If you look today, if you stand at the edge of the garden, you notice that what's the vernal pool is much lower. So that, why would they have brought in soil from miles away when they had that area right there to be able to build these plateaus? So I'm still just interested if anybody ever does hear, see a little kind of a notation, well, we brought in the soil from XYZ. I would love to hear that. Anyway, seeing Hobart's mansion for the first time, I was just stunned. Okay, the chronology of Winthrop building this garden. He was the fourth eldest son of Oakes Angier. They had two baby boys, both named Oakes, that died by about age 1. So then there were two other sisters. He graduated Harvard in 1895 and was expected to go to work, so this is where the publishing came in. And Oakes died in 1899. Then his wife, Catherine Hobart, died in 1903 at Quessett. And brother Hobart, living in the plaza in the same area, is heading the Shovel Corporation. And they shared the carriage house for two of them. So what does Winthrop do? He goes to Europe from about 1904 to 1906, and he was looking at theater companies there. With the death of his father, I think he just now felt this freedom. I can do what I want to do. And he got involved with the Boston Theater in 1906, and then Broadway by 1908. By 1912, he had built the Little Theater I've been there, the Helen Hayes Theater in New York. It's small, but it's a blockbuster little theater. And it had 299 seats. And the reason for this is that if he moved up to 300 seats, he had to put exit ways and all kinds of extra stuff built around it. So it was 299. So I don't want you to think that Winthrop was just this pie in the sky kind of a guy. He could really think his way through something. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, in 1911, in London, he married Lucy Fuller Cabot and built the garden behind Quessett House. So I haven't gone into it closely enough just yet to find out exactly how he did this, whether he had the garden ready for her when they came back and that this was like a wedding gift or whatever. But considering they were married in the middle of September in London, that really wasn't enough time to come back and say, let's put in a garden here. Winter is coming, and they certainly couldn't have done that. So I think he had to think about that before. There is a lot of correspondence that it's not that we don't have advantage of it. It's that no one's cataloged it all. Both at Stonehill and, believe it or not, at the New York Public Library, they have a lot of his Broadway stuff. He was really famous. He was in the New York Times all along. And when he actually decided, I guess his health was failing, and he decided to resign his theater work in 1929, 2 weeks before the stock market crash. And he made his call for the interview. The New York Times was interviewing him by telephone, and where he was Syosset, New York. I was raised there. I never heard the name Ames from Syosset. I don't know where they lived. We also didn't, although the North Shore of Long Island has many, many estates and wonderful places, Syosset wasn't one of them. This was a farm town. We had one estate that I knew of, the Bruce Estate, which is where my brother used to go hunting. But other than that, I am so curious. If anybody finds out where he was living on Long Island, I would love to know. Anyway, so this is Santa Barbara. I just wanted you to know that wherever he lived, I think he had this tremendous feeling for formal gardens. Look at that place, wow. And I think this is a better picture of him than that one that they have in the hall, don't you? He's a good-looking guy. I think that one was that's not good enough. So Italian or Renaissance gardens, these became very popular. The Medici in particular in the 1400s made them popular. And usually it was an area for contemplation, for quiet. What did you do then, folks? There weren't even books, right? Because this is before the Gutenberg press, as well as, TV, what did you do with your time? So very often gardens were the place to go and think and meditate. So this one on the left is rather simple, but you notice how well they have trimmed those, whether it's an arborvitae or a privet or whatever. It is very carefully trimmed. The one on the right is a bit more complex. You do start to see some levels in here, but notice how you just see this geometry, and that's the first thing that gets you. When people walk into that garden, why half the time what I'm looking at is those boxwoods are dying. Oh, it looks horrible. And they have this feeling of beauty. And it is that geometry that does that. The next one I want to show you is in Lenox. And I haven't actually visited it, even though we go to Lenox every year. We have a timeshare there. But this is Edith Wharton's home called The Mount. And this is from 1903. So she was doing the very formal kind of a garden at that point. And considering it's Edith Wharton, maybe they were buddies. But here is a slightly different one. This is Castle Hill, the Crane Estate in Ipswich. And it has an interesting story about, that's called the Casino, with rolling down to the sea with all of those lawns. And you can see what they did. They cut out the forest. I think Mr. Crane bought the property in the early teens, but it wasn't finished until 1928. However, he had hired the Olmsteds to do a landscape design, and it was rejected because they did not want to cut down all those trees. In general, the Olmsteds are very nature friendly. And this is the one that got away, and I kind of felt that they were right. I kind of know this place. I've not only volunteered there, but we used to have our meetings for the North chapter of Master Gardeners there in one of the side pavilions. Whoops. There. Uh-oh. Now what did I do? All right. It came back to the same spot. That's scary. Okay. Hortus conclusus. Now, when Kath Holland did her thesis called The Secret Garden, she called it a secret garden, and many times it is called a secret garden. But in Latin, and I was a Latin scholar too. A hortus conclusus, hortus, of course, horticulture, garden, but conclusus, conclude, it means it's enclosed. And if you look at the way Winthrop designed it and some of those early pictures, it is enclosed. I think it was important to him to be able to cut this off from Main Street so that you weren't able to see inside the garden and they could have their privacy. On the other hand, considering this pavilion, how loud the shovel works must have been, they were very close to a lot of stuff. Having that as an enclosed garden probably was a very important point for them, that this was one way for them to, get serenity and beauty. So this is somebody else's writing and everything. And there are a few points I might take issue with. The former kitchen garden, I don't think it was. I think he talks about, it's called the Bosco, the highest plateau there, that we now just have grass. But they actually had a path leading up into the woods. And Bosco, meaning a small forest, probably means that this whole area was kind of wild. The former kitchen garden, I think, could have been like near the frog pond, and then there's another one. I'm not sure, but I don't think that property was a kitchen garden. If it was, they buried it completely with all that dirt. And it was hidden with surrounding native vegetation and sloping hillsides, definitely. This was a whole sloping area. Enclosed by tall hedges. I think they may have been using inkberry early on. I asked a woman who is an expert in Olmsted, I said, he's suggesting all these native plants. Where did he get them? And she said, I think very often they went out into wildlands and got them there. But the clipped bay trees and the wooden caisse de Versailles, that's something that we no longer do. They had 5 gardeners full-time working around here. So we can't do that. We don't have a greenhouse to keep them all winter. But, when you see some of the pictures of the old pictures, you see these like a redwood box at the corners of the reflecting pool. I keep trying to do the wrong thing. Okay, Kath's plan, 2006. That's when she actually wrote the thesis. She had been working on it before that. Kath Holland, we wouldn't have the garden without Kath. This is absolutely what she was working with. View of the Quested Garden from the library. That little fence there, I think, is the fence that led to the Jeremy Lake house. That even though it was gone, it's still there. There are 2 wooden stone things. I think that was the front gate for the lake house. And then next thing we have, you remember these. This is looking into the front entrance. This is what it looked like before. We've got more. I don't even know where this is. The garage. It's just completely overwhelmed by all the plants. And this picture is interesting. It's an aerial photo from 2003 that was provided by the town. Now this white circle is the garden area. There's Ames Memorial, Library, Quested House, and this is what the garden looked like. I think that could be the ruins. Not sure, but boy, what a mess. And this is a picture of the wonderful Kath Holland. She now lives in Maine. I tried to write her to see if, she was interested in knowing what had happened to her garden later on. But truly, without the careful work that she did and the different plans of how it could be renovated, it couldn't have happened without her. I'm not sure. This might be her. Working on, you recognize that stairwell, but look at the mess looking at the library. Holy cow. So today, we're 10 years, 12 years beyond the rededication gala, and I want to talk about some of the things that have worked and some that didn't. particularly the elms and the need of why they had to be removed. I know that wasn't popular with everyone. And the boxwood trauma. Anyway, this is what the elm tree, it doesn't look as big as it did in life, I'll tell you. That thing had grown 5 feet just this year, or last year when we had it removed. You looked at the branch growth, 5 feet. And one thing that we always stress in Master Gardeners is it's got to be the right plant in the right place. And this was the wrong place. It is a very big tree, and every tree is matched by its root ball. You know, you have the same amount of roots as you have in those big branches. And just imagine those roots, which are rather shallow, going along. Yes, they were starting to get underneath the walkway. And yes, we were starting to lose limbs because they weren't as healthy as you might think, particularly the one on the other side. This is the one on the east side. The west side one was even worse. And they were shading the rest of the garden so that the boxwoods weren't growing right. The other things weren't growing right, especially on the west side. So we're going to have to, this is after, as you see, they get the Walnut Tree Company did a fabulous job. Great. But I still have to go in there and somehow, I think my angle grinder might do it, be able to grind out some of the roots so that we can get the arborvitae, which we have already, conical arborvitae, to replace those, to get them into the ground. So that's a bear. Then we had the reflecting pool, and to some people they didn't really mind that it looked like a sewer, but you can see all of the drain pipes and so on and so forth. So that was a very easy fix. This is something they do all the time in Europe and in some of our gardens, and that was pond dye. And this is totally environmentally correct. Doesn't hurt a thing. The little tadpoles and stuff that were already in there remained fine. They were still going. But it does two things. One, it does keep down the algae growth because the less light is getting down into it. This was a job for Tim Hurley every year. He had to go in there and actually, clean up the algae and do all of that work. So, and the other thing, it was just the reflection that people very often will just stop when they come and they see the reflection off of the water because it's reflecting the trees up above and it looks so pretty. So that worked very well, and that was easy. The boxwoods. With all of the different diseases we've had, they have got to be replaced, and for many reasons, even though we've been doing our best to rehab, to treat them with the greatest TLC imaginable. We did soil tests, make sure that the pH was exactly right, the right types of fertilizer. I used winter protection, wilt proof to keep them from getting winter burn and so on. We did all we could. But anytime you're digging one of these out, their roots were just terrible. There were so few roots, and they were very big roots, meaning the ones that they were originally planted with. So as far as being able to keep them alive or being able to keep them looking good, and one reason they looked good for so long was that Bill was essentially, just cutting them down to make, just a very square little box. And they looked good for a while, but it was also cutting off some of their best green growth that was needed for the roots. So at any rate, boxwoods everywhere are having problems. We have boxwood blight. I had a list of 9 different things that my people had to look out for. One of the things we had is boxwood leaf miner, which we've gotten a pretty good handle on. It's going pretty well, but you have to catch that one. You can't use any kind of herbicide or pesticide or anything because they're inside the leaf and it doesn't get to them. So you have to wait for them to swarm, which is 2 weeks in early May and catch them at that time. And then you can try, I use neem, which is environmentally friendly. So we got that kind of resolved, but it doesn't help with the roots. So we're just going to go about replacing them. I just replaced one row. The second row has to be put in, and that is boxwood, unfortunately. But the best thing is we found something else, and it's native, and it's probably going to work for us, and that is an inkberry. The inkberries are the hedges on the outside, and they are native. We've been pruning them back to make them look fuller and everything, but they're a good plant. However, usually they're kind of big and straggly looking. So there is a new type of a dwarf inkberry, and it looks just like boxwood. So that's pretty much the route that we're going to go, and it's probably row by row. It's not going to happen instantaneously. It's a lot of money. We just got a grant from Master Gardeners, and it's already spent. It's a small one. It would take us maybe 5 years, I think, of just using their money. So we'll see how that goes. But having the right plant was the big thing that we had to worry about. Now, the arborvitae are the very tall conical ones, and I don't know if I told you, Kitty, that I did get up there I wanted to clip, they're getting multiple leaders, so they're not looking as sweet as a cone. I got up there, and I did get off the extra leader and everything, and then I tied it together with twine, and it looked fine for about, 3 minutes. And the twine broke. So I'll do something else, but we'll get those leaders managed. The vernal pool, that means it's a certified vernal pool. The state accidentally had it here in the drainage ditch. They had the wrong spot. And the last time we got whacked by the Conservation Commission, they said, well, there's a vernal pool there. Well, it's not there anymore. It's where it should be. And we're not going to worry about that just yet. However, there is one garden, and one of my team had a great way of what we'll do with that, and that is solarizing is a thing where you just take a tarp or something and put it on top of an area in order to kill all the weeds and grass and everything. That we intend to solarize that, and then we'll probably plant with roses. Winthrop liked roses. If you look at most of the pictures, he has a lot of roses, so I think we'll do well with that. Then, what used to be called a stream, it's a French drain. Does that sound better? At any rate, the drainage ditch, looking into, Dana took me into the basement of Quessett House. We actually have a sump here. You can see the water. You can see where a waterway is hewn out of the rock, and it's great. So I think getting the drainage problems, this is an entire spring-loaded area up in here. There are drainage dishes everywhere, so I think we are probably going to be able to work with that. So there is our new inkberry, looks like a boxwood. It's called Gembox. And this is the stream and why we need to do something. This is actually an improvement. When I first started with the garden, that inkberry went underneath that bench. It went over the bench. Since this picture, I've taken out, there's now a few rhododendrons in there, but having this come in all the time is just like, it's overwhelming. We spend a lot of our time taking out, especially inkberry, mugwort, and so on, but the inkberry is coming from that area. One last thing I had to talk to you about was people in the garden. When Kath did her plan, it was expected to be a community meeting place. She actually thought it would be nice to have chessboards and so on where people could go there. Well, many of the people who are coming now will come. There is one psychologist who comes during her lunch hour to just unwind and, have some peace. We have a gentleman who comes very often at 5 p.m. before he goes home. He wants to, again, just blow off some steam and walk around the garden. But we have, and it could be a matter of changing society. Come on, Kris. A lot of the teenagers after school are coming, and they'll come in groups of like 6. And they're doing things like they'll walk up to the little lending library kiosk and try and pull it out of the ground. We're finding things in the pool all the time. Sometimes bricks have been pulled out of the walk and so on. And just the idea that these are young people who are kind of showing off for each other, and they aren't there to enjoy a garden. I really don't know how we can do that unless we get them to claim ownership, perhaps, that if they could help us build a rain garden here and it became their job to build this thing and they were invested in it, this might be a way. But it's a small group, but in general, we know exactly who the kids are, but that has been a problem of tossing stuff in the pool. A lack of appreciation for plants and hardscape. The lack of appreciation for plants, the example I want to use, are 2 grandparents who had their little, she was perhaps 4 or 5 years old, their granddaughter, and they were instructing her on how to pull all the petals off the roses and throw them into the pool. The kid, I think you'd probably forgive, but the grandparents, I don't know about that. A playground mentality that I don't think kids in general are used to going into formal places where they're expected, not to treat it like a playground. And we find so many of the kids are wanting to climb the walls and, just do all of this stuff. Well, those walls took an awful lot of money to repair and restore. They're a landmark. They're a historic place. And having children, particularly ones that aren't with a parent, being supervised. The other thing is that anytime they're not supervised, oh heavens, we should not have any toddler allowed to enter the garden without a parent, because the first thing they do is walk right over to the water. They either they'll be looking around to throw something in it, or they want to go in it. And because it's not that deep, that's fine. But let's not forget that we had that toddler that did drown. I was at about 1952 here in the Frog Pond. And we never, ever want to have little kids. The attraction is incredible. I've just been seeing this over the last 2 years, that they can't ignore the water. And the automatic watering, I don't know how it works, but we now are sure that the box was probably, if they had received some regular watering over the years, they might have survived. So, how are we doing, Winthrop? This was last fall. How do I know when it was? The elm tree is gone, but the grass is still there. Now that doesn't belong in a formal garden, and we did remove it. There were 2 of my master gardeners who every time they looked at that grass just couldn't stand it. But the other thing that happened last year, we were talking about this earlier, was we had a total loss of all of the old growth of the hydrangeas from a spring frost bite. This is all new growth, and we actually also had some blooms on it, so that worked pretty well. But I hope that Winthrop, compared to what he had, so there is the full pergola, right? So that's a little bit more than the stage. This is looking downhill. And then you do see the very formal kind of, I think those probably were arborvitae Pretty sure. They didn't, this does look like, the dwarf Alberta spruce are so fabulous. I know that they're not native, but they are really a beautiful tree for a formal garden. So let's hope that we are doing very well. And if you wanted to make your own formal garden, it's not that difficult. You know, the idea that you have to have lawn everywhere, I think you saw in the gardens that you do not have to have grass everywhere, not at all. You can make smaller beds. This is quite doable. And I think it's also pretty easy to manage. But we do have a helpline for Master Gardeners if you ever wanted to get some help on a particular problem. Please let us know. Anyway, thank you for all your help, because it does take a village. And this wonderful garden, I think, you know, the entire town needs to be so proud. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
A very picky question.
Good.
In the text that you showed that you did not write,
That's right.
it was referring that the garden is bordered by the pergola and the exhedra.
Yes, the exhedra, this is the exhedra.
Isn't that
And
wall?
it's usually, yes, it's there's a curved wall right here behind the hydrangeas. And this is quite common. You can see a lot of it. If you just do Renaissance garden and then look at all the images, you'll very often see that exhedra thing. I'm trying to think on Latin. Hedra. Not coming. The root of hedra is because it would be outside of the, because I thought it meant hedge. It's the name of one plant species, that much I know. Yeah, the other thing I probably should mention is our poor guys with DPW, you know, they have so much work to do. They're doing the entire town, the landscaping, among maybe 4 or 5 of them. And we get a lot of help, but clearly I've been waiting for getting the pool cleaned out, you know. The other thing was, and I offered to Tim, I said, if you'll take the benches and put them somewhere where people won't sit on them, I'll refinish them, you know, I'll stain them. I'm happy to do that. But that hasn't happened yet.
Waiting for DPW to move the benches.
Yeah, because they're locked. Yeah. They're locked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they don't end up in the pool, probably, right?
They have, yeah, because they unlock them apparently when they have when they rent out the space, and sometimes they unlock them and they forget sometimes to relock them. We have had benches in the pool, yeah. You know, you want to be forgiving and letting go, kids will be kids. And I won't tell you one of the stories that Bill told me about when he was a teenager and what he used to do. But nevertheless, you know, this is my baby. Every time, it's like, I am such an overprotective mom. It's too much. But anyway, no, I can't do them in situ. I can't just do them there because somebody will sit on it. You know, it's a public area.
So when you were talking about planting roses down by the vernal pool, is that?
Do you know where that bed is? There is a bed. We've actually pulled out most of the mugwort, but it's coming back again. That's the standard thing with gardening. If you don't plant something there, the weeds are going to take it. So there's just this lovely thing. The reason I was thinking about it, yes, that Winthrop liked roses is kind of an excuse. There was a woman who, she was actually the co-manager of, begins with an R, down in New Bedford, the Roach Jones Duff. How did you remember that? Oh, yes, they do. And they wouldn't let her work on them. although they were the co-managers, they had a strong horticulturist there. It was the same thing with Isabella Stewart Gardner. We were not only at the museum, we also worked at their nursery, which was out of town. And they were so fussy and picky and everything. I think, nevertheless, we did it, and you learn from it. You know, we're happy to do it. But then their head horticulturist passed away, and they were kind of in disarray for a while. So that site ended. Yeah, but as far as the roses go, if someone in the town really, you know, said, I'd like this to be a memorial garden. What that garden was, I believe, now who was telling me this story? Uma told me that somebody had made a donation of some wonderful Rose of Sharon, and then were told by the Conservation Commission, you can't have that. Well, I said to Uma, I said, I don't know why, because it is not on the Massachusetts prohibited list. It is in Kentucky and I think Virginia, but not here. So she says, I'm going to be sure to tell her who was it that she had the run-in with. But at any rate, I believe that could be why there is this very, very beautiful, neat bed. And rather than mugwort, why not? And roses compared to boxwoods are not expensive. But that's an open thing, I would say. As a matter of fact, that poor gentleman, Uma told me he has passed away since, that when he couldn't have that, to have replaced it instead with something else would have been a nice gesture.
Well, it's a very nice memorial opportunity. Who wouldn't like a lovely rose garden as a memorial?
That's the thing, yeah. We've already got so many, you know, there may as well be a sign. On the other hand, I often say to Walter at night, I said, that's where you're going to bury me, you know, none of this burial stuff. So maybe I'll go in the rose garden.
Composting empty spaces.
Do you have a major source for your plants?
I don't know whether I'm supposed to do this, so you didn't hear this from me. You didn't hear it from me. I have worked with Blueview. They have the best plants I've ever seen. So those two new little weeping cherries that have just come into bloom came from Blueview. And I've talked with Gerhardt, their major domo master garden person, as well as I was just talking, Bridget, the daughter-in-law, just made a special order for me so that I could see what these boxwoods looked like in a larger size from what I had, and we compared them. And she probably will end up, if I can't get some kind of a wholesaler discount, this particular cultivar is only made by proven winners. And they're already getting scarce because I compared several, and I wasn't able to order the larger sizes from most of them. But if I tell Bridget, you know, if you bring in some of those 1 quart sizes, I'll take them all from you in 2 years if you'll grow them to a bigger size for us. Blueview is one. I get my ground covers personally for my own property from a place in Georgia that's called Classic Ground Covers. And I'm able to, because of Master Gardeners, I'm able to act as a wholesaler. So even though I'm not ordering all that much, the wholesale prices are the way to go. If you're going to be putting in 50 plants one way or another, see if you can get wholesale kind of treatment. Let's see, who else is somebody that I could, well, absolutely. When I learned about Blueview, and they were recommended by, I had an intern, I was his, what do they call it? Mentor, and he lived in Canton, and he said to me, you know, you're gonna go to Blueview. He said they closed the place in Canton, but this is the one to go to, and it's really true. You know, they're particularly for sizable plants. that's I wouldn't even look somewhere else, and I don't care what they charge. There's a native plant nursery in Dartmouth, and I can't remember their name right off, but those are also very healthy plants. They're quite beautiful. I get a lot of things. The inkberries that I got, I ordered online, but if it's a proven winner's plant, they are very fussy about their vendors. And it's not like you're just buying that container. You're buying the license and everything else that grower had. Proven winners, I would say, any place where you can get the lowest price, you're going to get a good plant. And these were mailed. Some online growers are very careful about their shipping. The place in Georgia costs an arm and a leg on the shipping, but boy, oh boy, are they well packed. They're beautiful. They arrive just, better than at the nursery. There you go. But I'm trying to think, another places that I go, if you have the patience, I buy a lot of bare root stock. And bare root means that essentially it's very cheap to ship because they're not sending all the soil. And usually if it's a good producer, you'll find that they have nice roots and everything, and they'll come back for you right away. So I have a few places that I do for bare roots. Musser Forest is one that I have gotten a lot of evergreens from, and they'll ship even a 4 or 5 year old evergreen bare root, but it's been out of the soil for maybe 2 days. They wrap it in something nice and moist, and they get it to you for a terrible shipping rate sometimes. That's something, but where I got these proven winners one, they'll probably change now that I've told everybody about it. It's free shipping over $100, so that's not much. That was 2.5 boxwoods. Yeah. No, that's kind of like a fun adventure, is to know what kind of plants you're going to get from where, and get somebody that you do trust. But there are a lot of very small growers out there, and as I said, this one from Michigan that sent the gem box. Wow. I don't think Bridget could have met that price, that I got them for. It was a little bit less, but it's the absence of shipping. Oh, that's, you open up your front door and there they all are. That's, well, I do thank you all for coming. And as I said, any ideas you have to help with this difficult journey are always welcome. The next thing we're going to be attempting is, it's not part of my site. My site is literally the Quessett Garden, but that drainage ditch, something's got to happen. Even the son over, what is his name? Jonathan, I think, Cogliano at Blueview was saying something about when I mentioned all of these things. He says, well, they shouldn't be allowing that. The Conservation Commission should be doing something about your invasive problem. And I thought,
Everybody knows about our invasive problem.
Oh.
It's not a secret anymore.
Oh dear. Well, my purpose was, in writing this opinion letter for Bill and Ian, is to find a kind way for the Conservation Commission to say yes. That they realize that maybe, we have some conflicting things here, that the flood control is one thing, and the invasives are kind of off the chart now, because there's no vernal pool there, and hasn't been. We've been gardening this area for 200 years, for heaven's sake. How careful can you be? So far, Massachusetts has not been aggressive about restoration, meaning that all of these cranberry bogs are not being forced. They simply have to follow, no herbicides, pesticides, and so on, but they don't have to, make it the way it was before they removed all of the soil.
So we should each on our way out grab an invasive and yank it up by the roots and take it home with us, right?
Well, it depends on what you do with it. Don't put it in your compost. Oh, it's going to be more than that. But it's doable. And I think this is the thing, is that if there's a plan and you do it piece by piece, and as Raffi used to sing, inch by inch, row by row, we can get it done. It's just that permission, that very hardcore, no, you have to leave the area alone. Well, I look at, I looked quickly into the water that was flowing by, and I'm going like hairy bittercress, and I'm just pointing out all of the plants that are not native. It's a weed bed. So we'll do something else. But, well, namaste. Thank you.